Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We have a very special guest today who is Jonna Kaßner from the name of your university again. I've forgotten it. I'm sorry.
It's
Remind us.
Leuphana University.
Leuphana. Okay. Hang on, I'm going to mute somebody here. There's a bit of feedback there. So thank you all for coming. I just want to reiterate how important it is for everybody that's taking part in this blended intensive program to actually come to these meetings if at all possible, okay? And if not, as you know, they're being recorded, that you watch them before your group meetings on Fridays, okay? That's really important because the whole idea is that all of these parts are kind of interconnected, right? The idea is that Jonna and the other colleagues are talking to us about your online meetings on Fridays, and then the work you're going to be doing on your project in Leon after Christmas. All of this should be interconnected. So you need to be informed about what's being said and what's being read and discussed and presented in these guest seminars, okay? What else have I have to say? Sina also shared with you earlier this week the task plan, okay, what you're asked to do for when you come to Leon, okay, and in the weeks coming up to that. And we've been discussing it here in our class in Leon yesterday. And what we'd like you to do is, apart from talking about this session on Friday, apart from talking about Jonna's presentation, we'd also like you to actually talk about your final task, okay, what you have in mind, what it could be about, start brainstorming together and exchanging some ideas about it, okay? And if you have any questions about how it should be structured or, you know, whatever questions come to mind, you can make a note of them and we'll discuss them next week, okay, in our session next week, all right? And okay, and that's only one more thing to say is that if, in case you have any doubts about it, the task leaders this week are from Finland, and if not from Finland, then from Lithuania, okay? And so just keep that in mind, okay? So, Sina, I pass over to you to introduce our guest for today.
Yeah, thank you. So our guest today is Jonna Kaßner, who is a PhD student in Lüneburg, as Rob already said. And she studied to become a teacher for music and English. And for her master's thesis, and now for her PhD, she developed an escape game for secondary school. And her research focuses, of course, on that, but also on how students actually interact in these escape games. You also focus on speaking and anxiety, if that's correct, still, Jonna. You have to correct me if not, and also other things. If I remember correctly, your PhD study will focus on speaking mostly. Well, and that's about it. So thank you for joining us today, Jonna. I know you're extremely busy at the moment because Jonna is at the time, like in those weeks now, collecting her data for her escape room. So yeah, over to you, Jonna. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Let's just see whether I can share my screen again, hopefully. And you have to tell me whether it's the right mode. Is that the correct one?
Yes.
Okay, lovely. Please bear with me. I'm going to kind of switch between screens just because I have to look at this screen as well. So please bear with me for that. So thank you very much, Rob and Sina, for having me. And thank you all for joining this session today. It's lovely that you're allowing me kind of to share a bit on why and how escape games or games in general can be incorporated in language learning. And I'm gonna just briefly introduce the agenda for today. So we're briefly gonna talk about why games, what's the good thing about games. I'm then gonna talk about the terms gamification and serious games. I'm then gonna introduce you to escape games. Some of you might know them from your free time, from your recreational activities. I'm then gonna move to education escape games and the design processes behind that. And I'm going to give you an example, or I brought you the example of the escape game for my PhD research that I will hopefully see towards the end of the week with some students. And I'm going to show you the design process behind that. So let's start with why games. Games and learning is kind of a tale as old as time. I mean, during the Roman Empire, games have been used, and it was a well-known approach in education to incorporate games in learning. Nowadays, games are mainly focused or used to mainly focus on younger learners. only recently, the focus has kind of gone back to or incorporated older learners as well, due to the shift towards more student-centered approaches and active methodologies, and also due to the growing of the games industry in general. Some scholars have had a look at the impact of games in schools or in educational contexts, and I've put just some results in here just to show you an introduction why games might be helpful for us for teaching languages or teaching in general. So for once, games can offer an enormous variety of language contact situations. We'll come to that in more detail in a bit. They can encourage players to participate in meaningful interaction, whether that's oral or written, and whether that's with players in person or with the software, if it's an online game. They can offer comprehensible input as well as facilitate meaningful output, and they can stimulate and sustain intrinsic motivation because of this psychological need within most of us, all of us, for satisfaction of competence, autonomy, and relatedness. It's kind of the psychology behind why games are helpful in learning or can be helpful in learning. Just to briefly talk about some terms or the underlying concepts of games and teaching. There's the term gamification. Didactics et al. They proposed this very broad definition that gamification is the use of game design elements in non-game contexts. And Kim et al. Kind of narrowed this definition towards educational use, and they say gamification is a set of activities and processes to solve problems related to learning and education by using or applying the game mechanics. Now, within gamification, we can kind of place serious games. There's a bit of a differentiation because serious games are games that are explicitly designed for learning contexts. Now, games in learning context, they offer the opportunity for learner-centered, meaningful, collaborative, and interactive activities. Now, there's a term that's come up, or a saying, that we should be aware of chocolate-covered broccoli. That's quite a known term within kind of the gameful educational area or research area and practice area, because there's this the two sides of either having fun along the way, which is what we aim for, or tricking students into learning. So what we don't want to do is have something not quite as nice, maybe for some students, or quite as fun. So the broccoli, the learning part, what we shouldn't do is just disguise learning as playing a game. What we should do though, or what the goal is having fun along the way, meaning making the learning process and the learning more entertaining and more engaging. That's important to keep in mind. So it's not just putting some game mechanics in there and you should be fine. We should be aware of that difference and the chocolate-covered broccoli, really. Now, escape games in general, some of you might have played some already. There are different formats, which I'll come to in a second. They pose a great opportunity for language learning because they have a very collaborative and communicative nature to them. That's really the essence of escape games. The first escape game, I'm just going to dive into some history here just to give you a rough outline of escape games. The first escape game that was called an escape game existed in Japan in 2007. That's when they kind of came up. But there are precursors or inspiration behind escape games where one could say some of them might have been before 2007, and you could now call them an escape game. But really, there's the inspiration that creators of escape games nowadays say is behind their escape game. So there's LARPs, live action role plays. Some of you might be aware of them. They are something that inspired or still inspire escape games. We have point and click adventures. We have quite obviously puzzle hunts and treasure hunts that are the kind of core of escape games quite often. Adventure game shows and movies were also said to have influenced escape games and the creation of them. as well as interactive theater or haunted houses. You might know some of them from your childhood or from nowadays. And the themed entertainment industry is another precursor that has been named by creators of escape games. Scott Nicholson is a scholar who's quite well known across the escape game research area, as well as the education escape game research. And he did a survey and tried to give a really great overview and big overview on what escape games are, where they come from, what they do, etc. That's why I want to quote him here as well, because he summarizes the key elements of escape games quite well. He says, escape rooms are live-action team-based games where players discover clues, solve puzzles, and accomplish tasks in one or more rooms in order to accomplish a specific goal, usually escaping from the room, in a limited amount of time. I've highlighted the key concepts again, or the key elements. So an escape game is always based on a storyline or a narrative, a scenario that you are posed or that you are confronted with. And it's normally 3 to 7 players in a room. Scott Nicholson in his survey found out that in Europe, 4 people is the average in escape games, and that's recreation escape games for now. Just because you might have been confused already, because I'm using escape games and escape rooms kind of, and I switch between them. I use those terms synonymously, just because in my case, I normally prefer escape game, because you will see later on the game that I have designed is not actually escaping from the room. It's escaping from a situation or solving a situation, but it's not escaping from a room. There are several different terms for escape games that can more or less be used synonymously, but it really is or depends on what your room or your game is about, and also what you want your target group to expect from it. So if you say escape room, they might expect to be locked in a room, and that might scare some people off. That might be something students are not comfortable with. If you say it's an adventure game, that might be something students are happier with. If you say it's a life escape, that's something they might not know what that is. So just keep in mind that the term can be misleading sometimes, but within this talk today, I'm going to say escape room and escape game. Now, there are different types and formats of escape games. You might know the conventional or recreational escape games from your free time. They are there for pleasure and for having a good time with friends, family, whoever. And some companies actually use them for team building purposes, because they are as that collaborative and that's focused on communication. And on the other hand, we have education escape rooms or escape games. They can come in different formats. So we have the room, an actual room or more rooms. We have something like a board game or pen and paper games that can be escape games. There are online escape games as well as virtual reality ones. Educational escape games have a bit of a history. It's still a young history. They are not as researched yet or as used yet, but they're mainly typically used in healthcare and STEM subjects. So language escape rooms are not quite as common yet, even though they pose this great opportunity to actually use language in a meaningful and practice language in a meaningful context. Escape games have kind of found their way into education because of some very keen teachers who wanted to bring what they found very fun in their own free time and bring that into teaching in order to modernize and diversify their lessons and their curricula. So escape games in an educational context, they represent a non-traditional approach, which means it's an active, meaningful practice and use of certain knowledge and skills in an immersive setting. They can cater to different goals. For example, they can help practice learned material. They can help discover new units. You can assess your students formatively with escape games. you can use them as extra or cross-curricular activity. That might be something for our discussion later. Where can we actually use escape games and when is it good to use them? And they are also there to explore or foster skills and knowledge. There are some research findings on escape games that show some promising results when it comes to education escape games. Students reported an increased motivation and enjoyment when playing escape games. They had this sense of mastery and achievement or autonomy. That's escape games within more scientific fields. And then there's little research on language escape games, but there's one, for example, by Gomez-Lopez, who says that the students perceived the teamwork and communicative competences as very positive, and they felt that their language skills were being practiced in a very integrated and contextualized way, which made them feel more motivated and less stressed. What's helping is a common goal, which means as a group, you have to solve a certain scenario or solve certain puzzles. And that is kind of why you have to communicate with each other. You have a certain time limit, so you have to work with each other. Otherwise, you won't be successful in actually winning the game. So students have to communicate, they have to share ideas, they have to negotiate meaning in order to be successful in that game. And a good thing about language escape games is that it is an interplay of various skills and knowledge. So as a student, you can contribute your own strengths within there and contribute to the overall success of your group. We have Grande de Prado, who has given us a range of didactic potential of escape games. And they say that the didactic potential lies in different learning rhythms. As I just said before, escape games allow mistakes. You receive instant feedback because, for example, if there's a lock, you found something out, you put the number in and it opens, you know that you're correct. So it's instant feedback. And it's also increasing motivation and socialization within students. Weltkamp says that the language escape room is an authentic environment with meaningful activities and room for failure. So again, mistakes are okay. And escape games can offer a safe place or a safe space to practice and experiment with the language with your peers. So it's more playful, it's immersive, and the pressure is less, or there's no pressure in there if you take out the formative assessment part. What can actually be taught or learned or practiced with escape games? You obviously have the language skills, so different puzzles can focus on different language skills. They quite often intertwine and focus on a few of them. So we have the reading, writing, speaking, listening is language skills. And then vocabulary, grammar, and mediation is also something that can be fostered. Normally, the focus should be on meaning in an escape game. So along with task-based language teaching and learning, meaning is really the focus, but now and then a focus and form can also be incorporated. But again, be aware of the chocolate-covered broccoli. Don't just put a lock on a grammar task and call it a game, because that's probably not going to be fun for your students. Transversal skills are also something that can be focused on or that can be fostered, such as time management, teamwork, problem solving, as well as cooperation and communication skills. So attention is really on 21st century skills. And you can incorporate the interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary approach. So there's great potential to not just focus on English teaching, but combine it with, for example, a science or different history, whatever. You can combine different subjects and teach content with escape games. Now, I'm going to focus on the design process of educational escape games, just to give you an idea of how that can work and how that can look like. There are different components of an educational escape game. You obviously have your players, you have your puzzles, you have your narrative, but then there's also evaluation, what that plays a role. You have the equipment that you need, you have a debriefing phase, which I'll come to later, and a game flow. As I said, it's very normal to have a narrative or a storyline. That's what makes up the whole immersive experience of an escape game. I've just listed some of them here. I'm not going to go through all of them, but just to give you an idea, it can be like there's a broad range of topics, of subjects, of genres that you can focus on or that you can build your narrative on. My escape game, for example, which I'll show you later, is focusing, it's based on a literature, or it's based on a novel, and it is in the field of science and laboratory as well. So my students have to actually help locate a missing ingredient and communicate their way through their tasks. Just to give you an idea on how the task design looks like, tasks are always composed as a game loop. So normally you have different tasks and they either build upon each other or they follow each other. So you have a challenge, you have a solution that the students have to work on and find, and then the students get a reward. So if you open a lock or open a box that was locked, you normally get either the next puzzle or next piece of the puzzle, or you end up in your meta puzzle, which means you have solved the game. It makes a bit more sense if I put it like this. The longer part is the meta puzzle, that's the final solution. There are different path designs. There are advantages and disadvantages of each of the path designs. The sequential one depends on your group size, because if you have a group size of 10 people and they all have to wait on one task to be finished, that doesn't quite make a lot of sense. So quite often in recreational escape games, but also in educational ones, the hybrid or complex format is quite normal to be used in escape games. The task types are either cognitive or physical. So you either put, or your students either put a mental effort and logic in the solution of the task or bodily effort. But again, quite often we have a combination of both, and you combine cognitive and physical tasks with each other. This is just an overview by Wimke et al., who has given us task types kind of categorized by competence or skills. We have word tasks, we have memorization tasks. Searching is at the top of the list because this is quite typical in escape games. Students are supposed to go in and look around. What can they find? The whole discovery experience is a very good or a very important one in escape games. We have pattern recognition, math is in there, algebra. And that is, even though it says math, that's also something you can incorporate, obviously, in your language escape game. I have put down some examples by Nicholson. They are, again, from his survey. So he looked into a lot of different escape games and looked at the very typical tasks that can be found in recreational escape games that can be applied to educational ones. Just as an example, light and black light is used quite often. Using mirrors is something you can incorporate. Listening tasks, again, something I have incorporated in mine and will show you in a second, are quite common. Common knowledge, untying or tying ropes. The options are kind of endless here, but just to give you an idea. A few additional design aspects to keep in mind. I've just put them in here. Just if you actually want to design an escape game at some point, you can go back in here. I'm just going to walk through those and not focus on them too much, but that's also something to keep in mind. So how do you deal with failure? What happens if your students can't solve the escape game within the given time? Do you have leaderboards? So do you have a winner group or winner groups. Debriefing is something very important for those of you who have played recreational escape games before. You might not be too familiar with debriefing because that gets forgotten in recreational as well as educational escape games, but it's quite important because it's there to cool down. It's there to reflect on experiences that have been made in the escape game. And it's this whole slowly coming back to reality, because the experience is supposed to be very immersive, very within the game. The coming back shouldn't just be the lights turn on and, oh, I'm back in reality. You can think about incorporating NPCs, non-player characters, that can interact with your students and give introductions. They can be either in person or online. And you can, talking about online, think about the use of computers and tablets within a physical escape game. The game master is a role that the teacher quite often takes or has to take, but you can also assign other students to do that. And he or she is there to help the students supervise the room and see if there are any problems. Again, they can be physically present or not physically present, so be there via audio or video monitoring. Introduction is very important to your storyline. And two things to keep in mind is inclusion, accessibility. So if your students have any kind of special needs, any kind of difficulties, you should keep that in mind. And safety aspects, obviously. Locking a room is never a great idea. Anything liquid, I've got liquids in my room. That is something to think about. Are they harmful or not? Are students tempted to drink something which they're not supposed to drink? All of those aspects are something you have to keep in mind. And just to show you the design process, so that's how you would normally design an escape game. You would start with your organization matters. So you think, okay, what is my escape game actually supposed to teach? What are my learning goals? Then you think about the practicalities. So what space do I have? What's the time limit that I want to give? And what's the context? You think about your student, your target group, the proficiency level of them, the type or format of escape room that you want to create, and the role of the game master. It then goes to the design and conception process. So you really kind of go into more detail, you write the narrative, you create a room map, which I will show you in a second. You think about what hints and clues do my student need in order to solve a task? What materials can I put in there? What media, what mechanisms do I need? Is it just opening locks, or is it patterns or anything else? The setup then happens. So you set up your room. You include more atmospheric materials and props if you want to make it more immersive. And then a very, very, very important part is the play testing. Play testing is really crucial and is kind of determines the learning outcomes and the enjoyment of the educational escape game experience. If you don't play test, there will be errors in there, which you haven't thought about, and it all might collapse a bit. So play testing is super important. It's a trial run, and it's there to make improvements or modifications to your game if needed. And if you've gone back to conception and design because you made some modifications and you went back to play testing and everything went smoothly, that's when the game actually takes place. That's when you can think about the introduction and the rules and the debriefing, and also think about that the time that you need to actually reboot the room if a next group is gonna come back in. Now, I know this has all been very theoretical, so I just wanted to give you an example of the work that I have done. This is the way that I work, which doesn't mean that's the way you have to work, but this is how I started. So I knew I wanted to design an escape game for 10th graders for a group of 4 to 5 people, and the focus is on speaking. That's my learning goals. That's the focus that I wanted to have. And I knew I wanted to base it on The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. So I created a scenario where Mr. or Miss Gabrielle Artisan is asking the students for help because her friend, Mr. Jack Hill or Dr. Jack Hill, needs to find a specific salt and the pharmacy where he got it. He is suffering from severe memory loss and he's very weak, so he can't go himself. So he really needs the help and there's not much time left. He had to take some precautions and he had to hide the information of where to get the salt and where what salt it is from his evil assistant, Mr. Hyde. And the players need to enter the laboratory and complete several steps in order to find the salt and essentially save Dr. Jack Hill. And there are letter snippets that will guide the students through the storyline. So with each task that they complete, they get another piece of letter and they start to understand what actually happened, which is that Dr. Jack Hill has been self-experimenting with a medicine in order to separate the dark side from humans. So he's very interested in the duality of human nature, and that's his focus in his studies. So how I started was I imagined how I want the room to look like. I imagined the different parts and what belongs together. That's why this looks quite crowded. This now is a bit better and a bit less crowded because this is in a room map. So a room map really helps you to understand, is everything how I want it to kind of fall together? Does it all make sense? Is my game flow how it's supposed to be? So in here you can see that I've got several different games. So this is a hybrid format. The end meta puzzle is towards the end. So they have to know the name of the salt and the pharmacy of where to get it. That's how they solve the escape game. And there are several tasks in between. So they have to, for example, use a secret or a special ingredient, put it in different test tubes, and they reveal different colors. So the colors then create this color code that again opens another task where they have to read a newspaper and they have to find out a code in there. They have a task where they have to smell something. So they have to find out what the ingredient is actually called because they're smelling on them and they have to identify a smell. There's a listening component in there because they have to listen to a cassette, which will be interesting whether they can actually use cassettes. And there is the part where the letters actually, if put together in the right order, create this postcode, which then gives them the last hint of what pharmacy the correct one is. That's a very broad, general idea of my escape game, just to show you roughly what it can look like. We can go back to that later if you have any questions, but just to give you some ideas. I'd actually kind of just like to end the presentation with Veldkamp et al. Because I think they summarized the potentials of escape games quite well. They say the combination of escape room attributes such as team-based learning, content-based tasks, combining hands-on and minds-on, room for failure and reflection on accomplished tasks is not unique in its own for education. However, their combination in a playful physical environment seems unique and appealing to teachers and hopefully to learners as well. Just for you to know, I've put some collections of materials and mechanisms towards the end of the presentation. And I've also put some inspiration and ideas and resources where you can find some more help with the creation. But I'm not going to focus on that. That's really just for you if you want to create an escape game. And thank you for listening. Thank you for joining me for this. And I'm excited to hear some questions.
Vielen Dank, Jonna. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Jonna. That was very interesting. And I'm curious what you will experience with your escape game. It looks fascinating. Yeah, it definitely does. Torben has joined us as well. So he's a professor at the University in Lüneburg. And I think, Torben, you're also here to answer potential questions. He's Jonna's supervisor. So thanks for joining us too.
Yeah, hello from my side. Yeah, I'm happy to answer the questions. And yeah, thanks for this presentation. And well, yeah, it's actually also the first time that I see Jonna's draft for the room in all its details. So that was very interesting for me as well. Aside from the theoretical background, which is of course very helpful for anyone who wants to design such a game.
Very good. Okay, could you stop sharing your screen, Jonna? Is that okay? So
Absolutely.
we can see everybody. And we'll have some time now. So from questions, comments, ideas, or any especially questions that you might have for Jonna.
Yeah, there's already one in the chat.
Okay, let me see.
So Mattia, I don't know whether you want to ask your question yourself or whether we should read it out. But I can just read it out to you, Jonna, so you don't have to look at the chat. So let me see. So one question would be, what are the most common mistakes we should avoid making so that what we intended to be a game does not turn into another exercise that students feel forced to complete? What seems to be the students' response in regards of approaching them with such activity instead of the more classic methods? And a lot of thanks for your presentation.
Okay, thank you for that question. That's a great question. What should I start with what should we avoid? I'd say Scott Nicholson has said that in one of his recent papers. He says really avoid just putting a lock on an exercise, really. So don't just have, for example, a grammatical exercise and the answer is there to be put in the lock, and then you open a box and that's it. So don't just translate exercises into escape game tasks. What I would say is what you should focus on is variety of tasks. So use senses, make use of the different senses, and create tasks that are there to be worked on in teams. So what I forgot to say, for example, in my escape game, there's a box that they have to work on, they have to stand on two sides, and on the one side students put their hands in and they can't see what they're doing. On the other side, the other student can actually see what he or she is doing, the other person is doing, but can't do anything, and they have to communicate and say, turn it, it's a lock in there, there's a lock in there, and they have to turn it, but obviously the other person can't see. So really put some difficulty in there that's also kind of physical in a way. It's not just mental and logical tasks in there. And the other question was, the kind of response.
React, yeah.
Super interesting. I mean, the ones I have done before were always, the students were super excited to do that. I think it's kind of an literal escape for them. So it's actually getting out of the traditional teaching. It's actually applying the language. With the data collection that I'm gonna do, I had a bit of a fear of how many students would participate because it's voluntarily. But we had quite a lot of people come back, about 50, who said they want to take part. And I think what really helps is this peer and group scenario. So there's no teacher present in my case, and they are being monitored by me, but so they're not on their own, but it's the no pressure part of it as well. And the response I have gotten so far was extremely positive. Some of them said they didn't want to take part. They didn't give like concrete answers. I think some of them just didn't like the idea of being in that room. Some of them don't like teamwork, but generally super excited really on taking part in a game.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I can imagine everyone who has done an escape game, you know how immersed you are in that situation, right? So I guess that plays like like creating that situation or that scenario is also quite important, I assume. There are two more questions, Jonna. So I will just read them out. So Mika is asking, so thanks, Jonna. I was curious, how would you implement escape room games in second language learning in a situation where the students are adults and have the cognitive skills, but are still beginners in that said language?
I think I would, yes. What I've done before is, so the first escape game we did was with university students, so adults. They did not study English, so they weren't perfect in that, but they also weren't beginners. I have to keep that in mind. But I know of some friends who have done escape game activities with primary school students. And I would say, obviously, the tasks and the riddles will be different, but the whole tasks and sequential and all intertwining together, I think you could definitely do that and work with a lot of language help in the room. That's what I'm going to do as well. Obviously, it has to be still immersive and authentic. So for me, for example, I have a few posters or like picture frames on the wall that match the theme, so that match the whole laboratory, I don't know, potion making theme. But there's also, because I have a task in there where they are asked to find the test tube racks, and I'm pretty sure they don't know what a test tube rack is. So I have a little a picture with a lot of chemical, or not a lot, but a few chemistry equipment pictures on there that still matches the theme, because it looks as if hopefully looks as if the person likes to have that in there. But it also gives them a help because underneath it says the names. So have language help within the room, but try to still make it authentic. But I would say you can definitely use escape games with beginner adult learners.
Yeah, and just one additional point here. I think the most important thing is providing comprehensible input for the learners. So even for young learners, beginners of English, we tried it out. We designed together with our students a couple of games for third graders, first year of learning English. And the learners loved it. It was a board game with escape characteristics. So the students were supposed to help the zookeeper in New Zealand, and they received a letter, and they were they had to find out more about the animals that escaped from the zoo and the animals that were stolen, and well, the story behind it. And they were so much interested in the story that they really wanted to understand everything. And isn't that an ideal setting for language learning? If students are interested in messages, if they really want to find out what this entire thing is about, and if you can then provide scaffolding, additional help, language support, but not in a very traditional classroom-like way, like, well, here's a list of words, but as part of the game, then it really can turn into a very efficient learning scenario. And I think even for beginners, focusing on the typical word fields like animals, body parts, and so on, where do you live, very easy speech acts. It's doable, but it depends very much on how the game is designed and how you provide this comprehensible input.
Right. Thanks for your answers. That sounds very interesting, Tom, to do like with primary school students and in English. Have I understood that correctly? Yeah, that's impressive.
And I could also post a link here in the chat because we designed open educational resources. So the games designed by our students can be found on our website with all the materials and the entire, game flow and everything. So for those of you who are interested in finding out
please
more
share,
about how those games
Torben,
work,
that would be great. Yeah. Please share that link with us.
Yeah. But don't just use that as your innovative project that you have to create yourself. Don't just copy that. We will check. No. So there are a lot of other questions, and of course I invite you to ask them yourself. But I can also keep on reading them out. Let me check what is the next question. I think from Minea. She's asking, or yeah, I hope you're female and I'm getting that correctly. Minea is asking, I would be interested to hear about how you think assessment could be done. Do you believe it can be beneficial or not?
Personally, I think assessment is a bit of a struggle. I'm not saying it can't happen, but it obviously takes away the kind of no pressure part. I would say assessment would have to happen in a context way. So like it's how does the student react to others? Like it's not assessing the actual proficiency in a way like how often did the person say something wrong or like pronounce something incorrectly. But I would say look at the strategies, how fluent in a way are they? So how do they use repair mechanisms, or do they use repair mechanisms? I'd say that is something that can be assessed, and that would be great to assess. But maybe Torben has some ideas on that as well, because assessment isn't my expertise yet.
Well, there are certainly various things you can do, but again, it's all about not designing it in a way that it looks like assessment, you know, and in most cases, it can also be formative assessment. So you learn while you're doing the things, and you could also assess learners based on how well they perform in the game. So being able to communicate, being able to negotiate meaning, being able to discuss things, cooperate, effectively discuss solutions. I think that's the perfect basis for any kind of assessment. And I can't think of any more realistic application formats for the language. Most tests are very artificial, but here we would have a real language usage scenario and in a game-based way. So I think that's the best way to assess learners. And of course, you could combine it with methods of also recording the students, and then later on maybe having some kind of focus on form and say, look, we've got this little video in case all students agree to that. Of course, in a school setting, educational rooms might be very specific compared to games you would play and you would pay for it somewhere in your city. So there's always this educational background, and you can never turn it completely into a education-free zone, because it's always, in most cases, it takes place in the school building, in a classroom. So it is part of education, and students know that. And still, you should try to keep it as much away from this typical educational setting as possible, so that it stays a game. So yeah, assessment is very important, can be done, but should not be the main focus.
Yeah.
Because games and assessment of language do not really go together very well. So I think that's the problem.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We do have, Tom, you already said something about what the situation is like and what you can actually do at your school. And there are two questions, both from Dublin. So Gwen is asking, what size groups have you done this with, or what size do you think would be? I think it should be optimal, like for escape games. And also Aoife is asking, how long would it typically take you to design an escape game? And whether you have any recommendations for large groups in a small space with time restraints. Okay, so yeah, actually, this is what school reality is like, right? So Aoife is saying she has on average 30 students in a class in a very small room for only 40 minutes, 3 times a week.
I'm just going to start with the last one and then go back to the first one, if that's okay, just because I had some ideas popping up. So I just want to not forget them. So with large groups, there are several different approaches you can take. I'd say there is the option, which I've read about quite a lot, of role cards. So you can give each student a certain role in an escape game, and like have them act it out, give them certain like very individual challenges that contribute to the success of the escape game. What you can do is a small space, you said. It depends on how small the space is, but hopefully for 30 students to fit in there. What always is quite a fun game is to separate the group and have them work against each other in a way. So have 15 students, or even do 3 groups 10 students, have them work against each other, even give them like one of them is the zombie group, the other one is the zombie hunters or something like that, obviously without getting physical, but give them opposite roles and have them work against each other. And what we've done, I think, in Torben's seminar as well, is we had different, let's call it stations, and we had smaller groups of 5 people move around the stations or the different tasks, and the tasks were only complete if all of them contributed their part. So it's not quite exactly like the escape game where you're like running around the room and trying to find stuff, but you're at different locations in the room and you're contributing your part before you move on to the next task. And only if everyone has kind of succeeded, or again split it in 2 groups, maybe have them work against each other, then the escape game is successfully won. That's how I'd say.
And one additional note on that, it doesn't always have to be an entire game you're using, like 5 different parts. It could also be a group work activity where students in groups design parts of a game that other members or the classmates have to play. This could also be very interesting, so that you have, I don't know, 4 to 5 groups and they all design one activity as part of the game, and then they try it out. So involving students in the design process, making them design game elements together, is also for future teachers an important and very efficient format, because you develop problem-solving skills. You think about what would be the aim of this activity. So it's about anticipating learning outcomes. It's about anticipating the typical steps and the procedure of an activity. So all things that we would also need as teachers. And these are typical lesson planning and activity and exercise and task planning skills that we can also see in the design of games. So I think doing game development, going through game development processes together with your students in the language classroom is also something that works. And designing a game as a class, as a collaborative process, and making another group, another class of your school playing the game and seeing how they play it and playing their game in return, that's what really can work in a school setting as well.
Just to add to that, maybe, sorry, just because I saw that this is pretty much Eileen's question answered in a way, because the research that has been done on language escape games, quite a few of them are actually exactly that. That's one group is designing, and that's quite often future teachers. One group designs the escape game or task, the other one solves them, and vice versa. That's exactly something quite a lot of researchers have looked at, and it looked quite promising and quite beneficial. So definitely a very good idea, yeah. And
it can also be a part of, the school. I know a school nearby school here close to Lüneburg, and they had a container on the schoolyard, and students could develop escape rooms for this container. And then this very game that the student groups designed was played for 1 month, and then a new game concept came into this container. So I think this is something that could also open the schools to the city, the society, so that other players could play the game of the students. And I think this, in terms of learning outcomes, this is something that students consider to be very motivating. If they can produce something for others and for a real setting and for society, or for people outside the school.
Yeah, so a lot of potential there, and very, very innovative, I guess. Yeah, so thanks a lot. I think we don't really have time for further questions. Thanks so much for being here, for that interesting talk, and for answering the questions. Yeah.
It was very interesting. Thank you, guys. It was excellent. Really, really good, Jonna. Congratulations. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks for having us.
And well done for everybody that posted questions today. Lots of good questions as well, I thought. That shows, so that's the best compliment you can get, Jonna, I think, in one of these online lectures, right? So when you get lots of questions at the end.
Yeah, definitely. Lots of interest, which is lovely. Would be lovely to see a escape games in action.
Mhm. Okay,